it's something else. I will say, I don't think every single guy would do it. Many men are married. Like, a lot of guys are married, and they're not going to be like, hey, honey, my secretary's coming in to give me, like, that's not going to happen. She's going to be like, what? You can't do that. The relationship would fall apart.
Maybe.
But I do think that, marriage is an institution that is in decay, to shout out Sublime and 40 Ounces of Freedom. And with that being the case, it may start going in that direction. When you were talking about survival sex workers, the only thing I could think of, like, man, if we were in a society where that we had socially enforced monogamy, the way that Jordan Peterson describes it, you wouldn't have You wouldn't have that.
It's a societal problem. It's a cultural problem. It's not a government problem.
Absolutely.
Government is not going to fix this. Yeah. They can fix this by decriminalizing it, but they're not going to fix it ultimately. We as a society need to fix this. So when it was decriminalized, less people were partaking in the industry, meaning they were getting out of poverty. So it's a win-win for everybody. If you want less people working in the industry, decriminalization. If you want less people being trafficked and exploited and being raped by police officers, decriminalization, not the Nordic model, not legalization. So everybody wins.
So what is it between regulation and decriminalization that makes less women do this? Is it because when it's regulated, women will get coerced into this regulated establishment sex work machine? And if it's totally
because not everybody wants to work for somebody, and they don't feel comfortable working for somebody. So I don't. I know that I definitely don't want. I don't want a madam or a boss or somebody over me. I have a gun, allegedly, in Matrix or not Matrix in Minecraft. I have a way to protect.
You're allowed to have guns with Second Amendment.
I live in New York. So I have ways of protecting myself. If somebody wants to come after me when I'm at work, they'll get jumped by 8 of my cousins. So I'm good. But not everybody is that privileged. So if they don't feel like they have a way to protect themselves, which I always encourage sex workers to arm themselves, then maybe they do feel comfortable working in a brothel. And I feel like even though I don't agree with that, and I feel like that's like an exaggerated pimp, that should still be an option. Just, let's say I agree with owning a 10-round mag, but my neighbor owns a 30-round mag, and they're just a little bit kinkier than I am. You know what I mean? I'm not going to call the ATF and, tell the red flag laws and say, well, my neighbor's a little bit kinkier than I am. They have a little bit more, in their mags than I do. So get rid of them. It's just not fair. So
I think it's important to note specifically about what you're talking about, being self-employed, that only 1% of all prostitutes within the industry are self-employed, according to Nordic model now. 99% of prostitutes or people within the sex work industry are controlled by pimps. So it's really important. That statistic blew everything open for me because it's very hard to say that this would benefit the majority of people in the movement, trade, I guess you could say. I don't really have a great word for it, but not the majority of people are not like you that can leave at any time. The majority of people, 99% of people, are forced into it. They cannot leave on their own will. They are controlled by pimps, and they are essentially being trafficked. Even if they were, I can imagine that a few women consensually joined at first, where they had their backs up against the wall. They didn't have any other way to put food on the table for their children. I personally think there's always another way, but I can imagine the situation that they were in where they may have consented to it at first and then they just get stuck in it and a pimp takes over. They want to share their profit. I don't think it's this idea where women are just sexually liberated and free. I think it's what it's always been, which is men abusing women.
So yeah, I'm definitely thinking that there is nothing empowering about this job, and there shouldn't be anything empowering about this job for it to be a legitimate job. I hear what you're saying, and I understand it, but if you truly believe that statistic, which I don't, because there are so many biased statistics about sex work, and I can get into that later on. But if you truly believe this, where's the empathy? Where is the empathy for these women? If we truly believe that they're all victims, or 99% of them are victims, where's the empathy for them?
The empathy is not legalizing it
and
holding their pimps.
The empathy is decriminalizing it because it makes it safer for them, so they're not being harassed.
How would it make it safer for them? Decriminalizing prostitution would just take away all laws regarding to prostitution, which would essentially be a de facto win for the pimp sector, because now the government would not go after them. They can go after women. The most common age of entry for prostitution was 16 years old, with most women starting as young as 11.
Those minors cannot be prostitutes. Those are victims.
Everyone's a victim who's a prostitute.
Minors cannot be victims.
Minors can be sex trafficked and prostitutes.
Minors cannot be prostitutes. They're victims.
You could be pimped out and a victim. Two things can be true at once.
I think if it was decriminalized, I mean, right now, if the police find a woman, at a hotel or whatever, they can intervene under the law, remove that woman from the situation. If it was decriminalized, the pimp could literally be standing outside and be like, "Morning, officer."
But who's a
pimp?
That's
right.
Here's the problem. Who is the pimp? Right now, somebody that I grew up with just got arrested for the third time as a victim of trafficking for the third time. The traffickers, one of them was a woman who is apparently working as a sex worker, right? Apparently. In Idaho, if a sex worker pays their landlord rent money and the landlord knows that it comes from sex work, they can be charged as a trafficker. So what is a trafficker under the law right now, currently?
Well, yeah. Clarify the law.
Clarify the law.
But
the law needs to be clarified.
Know that decriminalizing it makes it, I don't know, at least in this context, based on what we're talking about, decriminalizing it seems to reduce the options for law enforcement to get victims out of these situations. So, not that it's always perfect. Often victims will be accused of being perpetrators, right?
So I remember you mentioned the other day something about Trump and his stance on trafficking after seeing Sound of Freedom, which, by the way,
he wants to kill him.
I love it. I love Sound of Freedom. It was like heartbreaking. Here's the thing: Trump is not as anti-trafficking as you think he is. He thinks he is, but he's not. He signed on to a law called Sesta Fosta. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it made trafficking so much worse. It put victims and consensual adult sex workers into the shadows and made it harder for law enforcement to identify either one of them. So they're arresting.
Well, real quick, just to clarify, this was the online law about shutting down.
It was the amendment to Section 230 that said that basically any platform that allows sex trafficking to be promoted on the platform can be held liable in court, and victims, people who get taken into sex trafficking, can sue these companies. So it's a huge win for, it may not have worked in practice, but it was definitely in the mindset of helping sex trafficking victims.
Well, prohibition doesn't work
to allow them to sue. But the prohibition was taking away our freedoms. This is protecting the most vulnerable.
I argue.
It's actually prohibition in a general sense does work. We often refer to prohibition as like drugs, and the war on drugs is a failure, and alcohol is a failure. So you can make the argument that prohibiting certain commodities or certain, substances doesn't work, but we prohibit murder. Like the idea that you can't.
Okay, then I will clarify. Prohibition of victimless crimes, specifically, because it's not going anywhere, and there's no reason to even try. Sex work isn't going anywhere. Drugs aren't going anywhere. Anything victimless is not going anywhere. People are going to do it whether you like it or not, whether you feel it's moral or not. So let's make sure that the people that are doing it are safe.
But I don't think decriminalizing would protect them. And I also don't think either of those are victimless crimes. I think the person selling fentanyl to the 16-year-old kid who overdoses and now her mom loses her son, that's a victim. Right. There's always dealers who end up having people overdose. And same with prostitution. These women are much more likely to die of STDs, of AIDS infections, to be abused, to suffer from PTSD.
Reason being is that because police officers are arresting women for carrying around condoms.
That is not the why.
They're fueling the HIV pandemic right now.
That is not the only reason
they're being
women get
arrested
abused
for holding
in these situations.
But that does seem like an edge case. Like I've seen those stories. There'll be like there was I can't remember one, a few years ago. A couple women were walking down the street, going to a club. They had condoms. The cops stopped them, accused them of being prostitutes. One of them got arrested or something like this, and it was literally just a woman with a condom.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. But I don't think that explains why women are disproportionately suffer from PTSD, emotional distress, physical distress. A majority of women who are in the sex work trade say that they dissociate from their body during sex. It creates a lot of issues with the mind and body. And I don't think that anyone is victimless within prostitution. Women are 60 to 100 times more likely to be murdered if they are prostitutes than your average woman. I think there are always victims.
That's because of stigmatization.
No, I think it's because the people seeking to pay sex are dangerous.
The way that people speak about them, the way that people dehumanize them, of course.
It is dehumanized. Buying sex and renting someone's vagina for your own pleasure is not human. That is not morally right. That is wrong.
It's not renting their body. It is literally paying their services and labor. So this is where.
And what is their services and labor? Essentially,
whatever we consent to. It's not even always sex. When you go to a sex worker, sometimes you're just paying just to talk to them. or you're paying for completely non-sexual things. It's not always sex or
That's called
inherently
therapy.
sexual.
That's called
right. And so
companionship.
when the people like were coming to me, they would tell me things that they didn't feel comfortable telling to a therapist because the therapist was a mandatory reporter.
Yeah.
So
well,
they
maybe
got
that's
it
in
off
place
their
for a
chest.
reason, to protect people. If somebody wants to say, I'm going to kill myself, I'm a danger to myself, I want to kill my mom, stuff,
Well,
there's
it's not
certain
always
laws in place for
something like
therapists to
that.
report that, to protect their safety. So I think that if people need therapy, they should absolutely go to a true therapist and not a sex worker.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a scary thought. I mean, that would imply that there are people who are like, I need to talk to someone about this, and then they sit down with you and then explain some very serious crime they've committed, knowing that you're not going to report them.
Or
Right.
if you do, that now they know who they told it to and who to come after. That seems like you're putting yourself at risk again, even more so.
That's the risk you have to be willing to take if you're doing the job. Just like people who work in hazardous waste disposal, they're working with needles that have, HIV on them. If you're working as a plumber, you're exposing yourself to fecal matter and all that. You can explain a job and make it sound disgusting and degrading and dehumanizing all you want. Like what's it called? Just came to my mind. Proctologist. We can make that job sound as horrible as possible, but we need them.